With us today. Admiral Richardson was the commander of Navy nuclear reactors when he was chosen by the President and Secretary Carter to be the Chief of Naval Operations in September of 2015. I was talking to him in the green room, and he said that seems like it was just yesterday because things have gone by so quickly. One of his most important jobs as CNO will be to shepherd the Ohio-class replacement program to completion, or at least well on the way to completion. Since becoming CNO, he has released a design for maintaining maritime superiority. His articulation of the means for our naval strategy that focused on high-end warfighting. It mentioned China and Russia by name and reiterated the time-tested characteristics of the Navy. He has publicly backed rapid acquisition, including for the U-class program, and now it's the C-BARS program, I guess. He's defended the LCS ship and program and addressed in a quite constructive way the ongoing debate about the tension between lethality and presence. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a thrill to be here.
AEI. And the ground rules today, as we do with these kinds of programs, is we'll have a little bit of a conversation up here for a while, and then in about 20 or 25 minutes, depending on how it goes and whether we're in the middle of something really interesting, we'll go to questions from the audience. And we have a microphone, and so if you want to ask a question, please wait for the mic and let us know who you are, and then fire away at the Admiral. Perhaps that was inaptly phrased. Ask whatever questions you want.
I'm used to it.
Admiral Richardson, yes, I'm sure that's true. Admiral, in your design document, you do mention Russia and China, and of course we're all aware that the Iranians are also developing swarming capabilities, and in fact that there are, if you look around the world, there's a lot of challenges that seem to be growing for the Navy. Which of those trends and adversarial naval capabilities worry you the most? And I always think in terms of China, and I'm wondering if maybe that's because that's such a maritime theater, and maybe I shouldn't be doing that. So what are your views on that?
Right. Well, when we put the design together, we really tried to step back even from that perspective and talk about not only the players on the field, if you would, but the character of the game itself. And so, we spent a fair amount of time in our articulation of the environment that perhaps as challenging as any of the individual nations that you mentioned and the transnational counterterrorism threat, there is this, there are these forces at play in the environment that if we do not respond to those forces, we're just going to be left behind. I like to use a lot of sports analogies, and the one I use for this is that we could have the best defensive roster in the NFL, but if our team is not trained to compete against a no-huddle offense, we're just going to be continuously caught out of position. We're going to be too many men on the field. You can imagine just the disruption that will cause. And so we thought, the maritime domain in and of itself, the system of oceans and seas, it's been in place since man first put to sea. But even within that context, as much as so many things have remained the same, the traffic on that system has increased by a factor of 4 since the early 1990s. And so there's this really rapid increase in the use of those seas and access to resources on the seafloor, access to continental shelves, both by virtue of the climate change and the change in the north, and also technology, which gives us those access. So the maritime system is increasingly used and increasingly contested. There is this system of information, which is really just exploding and changing the way we do business worldwide, including the maritime. And then and they're all interrelated, but the rate at which technology is introduced as well, kind of going to the call to become more rapid in acquisition, that is picked up tremendously. Not only the introduction of technology, but also the rate at which it's adopted by our people. And so if we don't keep up with that, we're just going to be fundamentally out of position to address whatever challenge in terms of competitors come our way. And so we spend a fair amount of time articulating that challenge and the need to address that challenge. And then, of course, there are the players on that field. You mentioned, I see them sort of as in three groups, if you will. One is, kind of the great power competition group, and so that would be Russia and China, and you mentioned those, sir.
And you noted in the design document that we're now back in an era.
I think we are. And it's been some time, really, since the fall of the wall, the early 90s, you might say, that we're in a time of a great power competition. And also, that has great implications for our business on the maritime, because I would say, and you mentioned it, in many areas, for the first time in 25 years, we are being challenged on the high seas in a way that we haven't seen in a long time. And so that's one group. And then the second group would be sort of Iran, North Korea. I hesitate to call them regional because nothing's regional anymore. Everything has global dimensions, and so, but they're a different group of threat. And then there is this transnational counterterrorism threat, and so that's how I kind of see the competitive environment in which we're operating right now.
Yeah, the design document talked about these disruptive forces, which I thought were very interesting. And one thing that was common to all of them is that they introduce elements which cause everything to move quicker. I mean, decision making. One of the concerns I have about decision making in a crisis situation is that your top level people have to make decisions because the pace of combat's grown so much. Now you also, in connection with this, another phrase that caught my eye in the document, you said we can't have a top-down Navy in terms of decision-making process.
Right.
So is that because you're concerned that a top-down institutionalized approach won't respond quick enough? And give a little more granularity about what you think a bottom-up Navy would look like that you're not doing today.
Right. I would say just a little bit differently. Not so much top-down versus bottom-up, but I would say centralized versus decentralized. Okay. And so I've always been sort of an advocate of decentralized operations because it allows those commanders that are out on point, distributed, to take best advantage of those opportunities and threats that only they will see. And so I think it's as much, there's a geographic dimension to it. A centralized commander will never have full awareness, as full of awareness as the commander in situ. As well, there's opportunities that will come and go. They'll be fleeting, and there just may not be time to kind of check back. Now, technology has sort of worked against us in many ways here. It's made us, it's made it easier to connect, therefore easier to check in, if you will. And so I think that not only is there some technological aspects of this, but there's some training and leader development aspects of this in terms of how do I craft commander's guidance that will allow those subordinate commanders go out in a decentralized manner and still, achieve the mission, right, in a broader sense. One thing that I think is fundamental to that, and what we're really talking about here is a level of trust and confidence, is that we have a common set of values, and so we spent a fair amount of time in the document talking about, in the design, talking about core values and the behaviors or attributes that would, support those core values. And so, one thing I'm focused on very intently is to make sure, it's a very competitive environment for people. And despite many, many choices, we have still very, very talented people coming into the Navy and raising their right hand and taking an oath to support and defend the Constitution. And, we don't offer them some of the compensation that other options would offer. But I think that they're attracted to the fact that we offer them a set of values and an opportunity to be part of something that's bigger than themselves. And so we have to make sure that our organization, our behaviors, are as consistent with those values as we can make them. And that allows us to have that trust and confidence so that when I send a commander over the horizon with his or her team, I can be confident that they're going to come back stronger in every way not only from a warfighting perspective, but also in terms of this value-centric belief system that we have.
Now, you also mentioned, because you talk about decentralizing and trusting commanders who are on the site, you also in the document talk about the importance of accountability. So let me ask you a question in a little bit different context. I'm curious about your response, because as you know, the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, addressed acquisition reform. And Senator McCain and others felt very strongly it was important to empower the service chiefs, really an implementation of the idea you just talked about. You know, as you have certain people, they have responsibilities, so you give them the authority commensurate with those responsibilities. So maybe a little self-serving to ask you, but what do you think of those trends?
Yeah.
What other changes would you like to see in the acquisition process, if any, that maybe you're talking to the Secretary about, or the oversight committees? And do you want to offer any views on where you think Goldwater Nichols ought to go to, or ought to go, if at all? I won't press you on the final point if you don't want to share. But
right. Well, at least in the acquisition part,
sure.
I'd be happy to talk about that. And so, I welcome getting more involved in the acquisition programs. If I could just sort of camp out on the accountability element first. Oftentimes now, in particular, I think we too often conflate the term accountability with discipline. And accountability, in my mind, is a much broader concept than discipline. And so I see myself as being responsible or accountable for delivering the Navy that the nation needs to execute our mission. And so, that's something I have to deliver, right? And so, I'm ready to be held accountable for that, to be accountable for delivering that. If that is not always consistent with just punishing everybody.
Sure.
So we have to make sure that we have the fullest sense of accountability when we talk about that. And so we try and take a stab at that in the design. With respect to applying that to acquisition, I like to think of a concept of ownership, which is broader than accountability still, and includes not only accountability but also authority and responsibility, and very importantly, the technical knowledge, to know what you're running. And so I think that with the 16 National Defense Authorization Act, and also combined with Navy policy, the combination of those two things allow me to exercise ownership much more so over Navy acquisition, and I look forward to exercising that completely. Other areas where I think where we're striving to improve an acquisition is, not only the oversight and controls, I would say, the discipline, but also the speed, as you mentioned. And so we've got some initiatives to do some, to create a speed lane, if you will, for those programs, technologies for which it's appropriate to get quickly out, do some rapid prototyping and experimentation, get those out to the fleet. Maybe even some technologies that are well enough conceived to go rapidly from cradle to grave and deliver. And so we're looking to try and build that speed lane for acquisition, doing this very much with the Secretariat and OSD, and then and also discussing this with the Congress. And then we'll migrate, more and more of our acquisition processes out to this speed lane as it becomes applicable.
Let me follow up on a broad acquisition issue, and I referred before to the tension, or the potential tension, between presence and posture, or presence and lethality. You can describe it different ways. And the truth is, as you've said, and as even the people on both sides of it, or who were perceived as being recognized, we need both presence and posture. Right? We at AEI have been working very hard to get substantial increases in the top line of the budget. I mean, absent that, can you figure out a way, you think, to afford both in the, in the necessary amounts? Are we headed towards a Navy of smaller vessels we try and make more lethal? Share your ideas and your thinking about that.
Right. Well, it is attention is a great way to talk about it, and it's sort of my job with my leadership team to sort of walk that knife edge, right down the middle of that. And And so I have been deflecting, kind of trying to be pigeonholed into that false choice. Are you a capacity person or are you a capability person? Well, the truth of the matter is I've got to be both, and that's exactly what the nation expects. And, I see it sort of as a needle that has to strike that balance, and sometimes it has to correct over this way, and sometimes it has to correct back, another way. But as long as we sort of do our best to strike that balance, we're doing our job. And so, and this budget, I think, reflects, a movement in that as well. Maybe back towards high-end capability, if you wanted to, talk about which way the needle is moving right now. But I think you've pointed out that you really need both, right? You can't go all in one direction or all in the other because you just won't have a Navy that can execute its mission. And so as we look for future concepts, and these sorts of ideas are in the design as well, we're really looking to, and it's in this line of effort that describes operations and warfighting, look forward now, anticipate some of these technologies, try and do our best to anticipate what the competitive maritime warfighting environment will be. And then, is our fleet, posture, are we leaning forward into that future? Are we looking at all possibilities in terms of employing not only the fleet we have today, as creatively and effectively and efficiently as possible, but also are we looking to what's the next generation, what must that look like, with all of these technologies, particularly with the advent of information warfare really becoming a mainstream of our business. What does the next warship look like? I think that that's also a responsibility I have, and we look forward to getting after that.
And in trying to fulfill both of those, and fulfilling both those responsibilities, I don't like to refer to the Navy as trying. I think you succeed, but there's no question that it's a tremendous task, especially with the Navy where the number of ships has declined.
Right.
Your sailors are working very hard. They're deploying for a long time. Each of the services is struggling with readiness issues. Are there any in the Navy which concern you particularly, where you're putting more personal attention to in terms of readiness stress, readiness issues,
right,
readiness vulnerabilities?
Well, what we're paying a lot of attention to is, again, and it is striking a balance. Certainly, those forces that we deploy forward are going to get our absolute top priority. We will never deploy forces that aren't fully ready to confront the full spectrum of challenges that they may face out there. But in the long term, we've done a lot to return to a model, a force provision model that delivers forces at what I would call a sustainable rate. Okay, so we're bringing deployment links back under control. At the end of this year, the plan will be for 7-month deployments, which is at a sustainable rate, both from a material standpoint, but even more importantly, from a people standpoint. Right?
Now, when I went into Congress, the idea was 6 months but you're convinced that 7 is sustainable.
We can get 7, yes, sir. And so, so that's our going-in model. Now the responsibility to execute that plan, get through maintenance on time, get through the training cycle on time, so that you deploy ready from every aspect. That's what this optimized fleet response plan is doing. Within that, we've got this deployed readiness that we deliver, and then we've got kind of the reserves that the reinforcements that would go out, and so that's where we are looking to invest, recover that readiness as quickly as possible. We're still digging out of the trough that we dug with the 10-month deployments, and driving ourselves into a readiness debt. And we're seeing that a bit across the board. Some areas are more acute than others. Our strike fighter inventory management has got my attention in a very focused way. But I think across the board, the plan to recovery is well understood. It's going to take a little bit of time. It's going to take predictable, sustained resources to get there. Any fluctuations in that, either from the amount or even the uncertainty of the delivery of that, those ripples get felt through all the contracting actions and everything else that we need to do to return ships and people back to full readiness. And so we just look for as much stability and predictability and adequate resources to recover that.
And do you think, I'm sure you're focusing on getting a buy-in for these from the sailors, from the men and the women who actually have to go out and do it. Are you satisfied with where morale is? I mean, do you think that people get this future and are buying into it?
Well, I think that they are, right? One of the first things I did was I had the opportunity to sort of visit our Navy around the world, and it was inspiring, really, to see in the 7th Fleet, out in Asia, in the 5th Fleet in the Middle East, 6th Fleet in Europe, every one of those theaters very, very challenged in very different ways. And everywhere I went, and I talked to a lot of sailors, they have a solid understanding of the role that they're playing for our nation, protecting our interests abroad. They're partnering with other nations and other navies in multinational coalitions. They're meeting challenges head on, and they are focused and ready. They have a great sense of their purpose. And so I think that right now morale is good. They're very interested in this, right? I mean, you would, I think, be amazed at the strategic nature of the questions you get in an all-hands call.
Actually, I wouldn't.
And this is from, a seaman all the way up to a senior officer. They're all asking great questions about, what about this readiness thing? Are we going to come back to sustainable levels of readiness, sustainable deployment links? And so they know about this plan. We're returning to 7-month deployments. That's sustainable. I don't think that they argue that number, but they've, they're eyeing it and they're watching it closely as we deliver.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I was so interested in your bottom up because you have such a reservoir of expertise, energy out there in the Navy,
Right.
and people are thinking about issues that you normally think was the level above where they're actually, operating, and there's a tremendous amount. Let me ask you one more, and then we're going to go to questions. I'm going to switch a little bit here. You and the Commandant, General Neller, have or mentioned last week that you're looking at an improved integration between the carrier strike groups and the amphibious ready groups. Mm-hmm. Can you just talk a little bit about what you think that might entail from your side of the team?
Sure.
And then we'll go to questions from the audience.
It's work to be done still, but General Neller and I have really committed, and it falls right into that line of effort that talks about operations and warfighting. And it is about naval operations and naval warfighting, right? And so the Navy Marine Corps team as a combination is sort of, we call them America's away team, response team, what have you. And so we can't do anything in isolation, I don't think. So as we start to develop new and creative ways to employ our force, to design our future force, we need to make sure that we are doing so, with our arms locked with our Marine Corps brothers, because they get to and from on ships, right? Their mission is highly dependent upon our part of the naval team, and vice versa. And so this this great partnership, we've just committed to take this on together so that we're as synchronized as possible as we go forward.
I was pleased to see that, because one of my experience has been Congress or the Secretary can tinker around with structures and lines of command, and that's important. But if the people who are actually in the positions are not committed to working together, there isn't any org chart that will fix that problem.
Right, no, that's right. Personalities matter and all those things. And so we got together very quick. I think we were confirmed within a week of each other, and we got together very quickly after that. We've met many, many times since, just to kind of reinforce and visibly demonstrate to everybody who is looking that there is no daylight between us, and I think that's going to be important. Before we go to questions, if I could just come back to your point about I guess the astuteness of our junior sailors. Another part of the design is in this core attribute of initiative.
Right.
And it's just kind of part of my upbringing that we're always, conscious that the very best question or the very best idea, might come from one of the most junior people in the room, and we need to be open to all of that contribution and open to all of the curiosity that they bring, and encourage them to ask questions when they don't know something, encourage them to contribute, because they may have the one thing that saves the day. So,
right.
Yeah.
I always felt that's an important principle in acquisition, to err on the side of getting the platform out there, because once the guys and the gals work with it, they can tell you then what you need to do. But
Right, exactly.
I don't want to, this isn't about my views, it's about yours. So let's go to questions. Yeah.
Hi.
Oh, we need a mic probably there, right?
I can be loud.
As we well know.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sydney Freeburg.
Sydney and I have been having this running gun, conversation that,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sydney
So when I said fire away, that was like...
Yeah, Sydney, you can see Sydney sit up straighter.
Going to fire away. Okay. Now that we've prepared the ground for you, Sydney, go ahead.
Sydney Freeburg, Breaking Defense, loud guy. You said something tantalizing, which is you guys are looking at the next generation of warship, the warship of the future. Obviously, you do not have a model in your pocket to pull out at this
Right,
stage.
right.
But what are some of the considerations that are going into that concept? What are some of the technologies you need to start investing in now to make that happen? And for that matter, the sailors and officers who are going to be on that, who are probably in grade school now, what different qualities they need to show in terms of initiative, in terms of being digital natives versus the current generation of sailors, as good as they are.
Right. So I think one is a technical aspect, Sydney, and I think related to that will be a development aspect. And so you talk about digital natives. So many people who are coming into the Navy and the workforce in general are so very, very adept and comfortable with some of these digital technologies. I think that that's going to be a key part of the next generation of warship. It will also be, I guess, digitally native or information native. And so my sense is the way we are incorporating information warfare now is we're taking the platforms that we have and we're making them very capable by adding systems on. The next generation, I think, is going to be, the information technologies and information warfare will be in the DNA of the ship from the very design. And so, and we also have to be mindful that I don't think that the next generation that will man that ship is in grade school. I think we're going to have to do that much faster. We're going to have to move to an overall concept where we might deliver a platform that will, or a family of platforms, but inside that family, that platform may last the life of a traditional ship, 25, 30 years. But inside that, I think increasingly so, we have to make it very much more modular or adaptable to improving technologies. And so, you can sort of see two things. There'll be some aspects of that ship that'll last 25, 30 years, and maybe, but there'll be an increasing percentage of that ship that will be riding that Moore's Law curve, if you will, and refreshing in terms of payloads, in terms of sensors. All of that will be improving much more quickly. Now, the leadership that's going to have to eventually run those ships is going to be another part of it. And so it goes back, I think, to this decentralized approach. And I think that, on one hand, it's tempting to think that all of that information and everything is going to bring with it a lot more decision clarity. But I think when you really consider full-on information warfare, it's going to be at least as challenging right now, if not more so, to ferret through all of that, what's real, what's not, what's relevant, what's not, and make decisions in that environment. So we still need to continue to address sort of the fundamental nature of warfare, which is, a competition between two thinking adversaries, and find the best way to pit those two minds against each other.
Yes, ma'am.
Mitzi Worth, I'm with the Naval Postgraduate School. Admiral, I'm really impressed with your statement and story for us. Having worked on acquisition reform back in the Carter years and knowing how hard that is, what's the plan of educating, I guess, the people that are in the acquisition system so that they become attuned to the new things that are needed? Because so many of them are caught in their own stovepipes. And I guess it's the question of continuing to educate the workforce so they keep up with the 20th century changes.
Right. So I think there's a couple of aspects to that, Mitzi. One is, one line of effort in the design talks about partnerships, and within that we talk about partnerships with industry and with within academia and labs and those sorts of things. And so we need to make sure we're doing everything possible to lower the impedance barriers for that community to continue to collaborate, right? And I think we're making progress in that regard. And so that will just make our government technologists as deeply ingrained and as fully knowledgeable as possible of what's sort of the state of the art out there. What is possible? And then within the kind of the standard acquisition muscle movements, I think we do a pretty good job with our budgeting team, right? So those N8 folks, they get identified early, they get a tattoo, and they're never out of that. They come back and back and back, right? Similarly, the program managers go down to Defense Acquisition University, and there's some nice formal training there, and that curriculum can be refreshed as the conditions change as well. Where I think there might be some gains to be made is in the requirements officer part of that, and which is often the most important part. And so I'm looking to formalize a little bit more how to educate our requirements officers so that they know sort of what is really truly needed. And then you get the team together and you find out, kind of where is that knee of the curve, right? So that my requirements, I might have articulated a requirement that would be terrific, except that when I bring the technologists in and the budgeter in, I can't afford it, right? So I've got to find that sweet spot. And those early conversations, I think, are absolutely critical to getting that right. And then we've got to have the discipline to execute so we don't creep off either in requirements or what have you, so that there's discipline through execution.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. That gentleman there. Yeah.
Thank you so much. My name is Atsushi Okudera from Japanese newspaper Asahi Shimbun. Thanks so much for great speech. And I'd like to ask about the South China Sea. As you know, China is building up artificial island and military outposts in South China Sea, the Spratly Island. For United States Army, strategically, I'm asking about what is your estimation or how serious they're building artificial island or possible military outposts in South China Sea, particularly in terms of A2AD or Chinese surveillance capability or some exit of Chinese submarine or power balance in case of the dispute. How do you think its seriousness,
Right.
particularly from the military aspect?
Right.
Thanks so much.
Well, I think that I'll just take your question and address it at a little higher level if I could, and try and put any kind of military activity there in context. And the reason we have a Navy is to protect our interests, which mostly relate to prosperity and growth, right? And so it's that maritime security that allows us to do that. We've had in place now a set of rules, norms of behavior, international laws, for 70 years that have allowed many, many nations to grow and prosper. It's a pretty level playing field in terms of, and it's pretty well articulated. And so international waters are open to everybody, and there are rules governing maritime trade, which is so important to so many nations, particularly in that region of the world. I just came back from a visit to India, and when you think about how much we have in common, and it's similar with Japan. We are maritime nations. We all get 90% plus of our trade via the sea. And so the rule set that governs traffic over those seas is extremely important. And the rule set that's been in place for the last 70 years has been an inclusive set that allows everybody to prosper, and many of the nations, including China, have benefited greatly from that rule set. So where I get concerned is, in many ways, China as a very complex growing nation is behaving consistent with that rule set, right? We do exercises together. There's things that are very consistent with that. This activity in the South China Sea with respect to island building, excessive maritime claims, it injects a tremendous amount of uncertainty and disruption in terms of trying to ferret out what are the intentions here. And anything that would sort of threaten or bring into question that set of international rules, that set of norms, I think we'd be very concerned with.
Bob. Gentleman in the green, Bob.
Hi, Admiral Tony Capacity with Bloomberg News. Can you address as a submariner, the real challenges with the Littoral combat ship, as well as the perceived problems with the program that you've inherited that you need to either fix or disabuse people of in order to retain support of the program?
Tony, what does my being a submariner have to do with that?
You're not invested emotionally in the program.
As a submariner, I have no emotions at all, Tony. So, I think that we just have to take a very non-emotional view of the Littoral combat ship. I think it absolutely has a role to play in the United States Navy, and that role I think has been very well articulated. And so we have to make sure that we all understand what that role is and what it is not, right? And so this is not a ship that was ever designed to be, the one-stop, high-end, solo warfighting ship. It does some things well on its own, right? I mean, certainly, it's and we've done that, right, with a couple of deployments. It does other things very, very well in concert with other, platforms, and so I just think we just, like you said, non-emotionally, understand the role of the ship and what it can do and what it can't do. We also have to understand, like every new ship, every new class of ship, we're learning as these ships come out and go to sea. And as we learn those lessons, we are bringing those on board and we're adapting. And as we talked about a little bit before, the crews and the sailors that go out and run these things around and give them those initial deployments and test, their creativity starts to enter into the equation, and they say, hey, we never thought of this when we designed the thing, but this thing works pretty well if you just do this. It's designed, kind of in an open architecture, maybe leaning forward into this modular type of an approach. Some of the things that we can put in those modules now, today, weren't even a twinkle in the eye when we designed that ship. That's how fast things are changing, but there's some open architecture there. I think we also have to be clear-eyed that, as with any new ship, there are some challenges, right? There's some engineering challenges and those sorts of things, and we don't want to walk past those, and we'll address those as they go. But overall, I think that this type of a platform, in terms of achieving overall maritime superiority, has a legitimate, important role to play, and I look forward to, learning and addressing problems as they arise, and helping this program achieve not only the role for which it was designed, but also maybe things that we never conceived of.
Let's go. All right. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Alex Sanchez. I write for the Center for International Maritime Security. Admiral, thank you for your comments. My question is about the Fourth Fleet, also known as the Paper Fleet, since the only vessel that seems to be deployed to it is the USS Comfort when it carries out humanitarian missions in Haiti or the Caribbean. I was wondering what you think about it, about the Fourth Fleet's future, when you talk about cutting redundant bureaucracy and operational costs. And have you ever talked to Admiral Balance, the commander of Navy South, about whether you actually need to continue having this fleet in existence? Thank you.
Well, I think the Fourth Fleet's a very important fleet, and we, it's really just fundamentally a matter of prioritization. But we do provide sort of a steady capability down there, and that capability. I mean, we can show the numbers in terms of illicit trafficking, interdiction, and those sorts of things that it's involved in. The productivity, if you will, of that fleet continues to show its value. We also recently had the George Washington strike group go around and do tremendous exercises with many South American nations as it transited around, the continent and up to Norfolk. And we'll look for every other opportunity like that to do what we can to support, our allies and partners down there, exercise with them, and so I think it's a fleet that is overall doing solid work. We will continue to support it with every resource that we can spare, and so I think it's a very valuable asset down there.
Yeah, well, it's an example of the concern about presence, right, versus lethality. When you only have a certain number of ships, they only go so far. Yes, in the back.
Yes, I'm Russell King. Yes, Admiral, I was wondering if you could discuss generally naval choke points, because I understand there are certain nations who station forces near choke points. I believe Bottomup Navy might be one. I've heard Chinese maybe stationing some troops near there. I think the Russians maybe have some troops near the Turkish Straits. Mm-hmm. And the Turkish Straits actually, I think, is more free for Russians going back and forth because of the Montreux Convention. But is there any particular threats to choke points that you need to consider, and especially with a smaller number of ships we have in the Navy today?
Right. So this idea of choke points is a really interesting one, I think. And some things that regarding choke points have really not changed, right? The tectonic plates are not moving fast enough. The geographic choke points that we confront today are the same ones that we confronted when we deployed against the Barbary pirates, right, off the Straits of Gibraltar. And so if you look at a map of the oceans, although it's one great thing about the oceans is you can move so uniformly across it, right? It's a very fluid environment, if you will, if you'll allow me that pun. But they don't. Right? I mean, it's not a uniform distribution of traffic, and sea lanes and everything are defined by those choke points. So, and I don't think that fundamentally has changed in the history of, maritime trade and maritime security. What has changed is some of those other forces that I talk about in the design. And so when you combine information technology with information availability, what was a fairly local choke point, if you've got the right systems there, you've really, let's say that you could influence traditionally out to 100 miles, from a point. Well, now you've got technologies that can strike at a distance with very great precision out to 800 miles, let's say. And so you start to overlay, compare 200-mile circles with 800-mile circles and lay those over the choke points, and you start to see what we mean by these anti-access types of technologies that make things much more challenging. So I think that it's really a much broader problem in terms of choke points. We're not restricted necessarily to the confines of the geographic choke points. They've been spread out by virtue of some of these technologies. We talk about the information system. And again, you log onto your computer and you think it's all very accessible, it's all very fluid. But the fact of the matter there, too, is that that information flows on cables and wires and servers and all those sorts of things. And so satellites. And so there's a structure even there. There's choke points in that information system as well. And so this idea of choke points, because they offer so much in terms of opportunity and vulnerability, I think is one that we have to monitor in all the systems in which we operate. And these forces that I take a stab at describing in the design, I think are changing the nature of what a choke point is.
Let me ask a follow-up on that, because you mentioned information flow several times, and appropriately so. So we know the department's more concerned, and I think we're all concerned about the viability, survivability of the space architecture in the event of a conflict. And we've really only just begun to think about what we need to do there. But when you are working through your new shipbuilding programs, are you thinking in terms of systems that would be able to maintain that flow of information in a theater of combat, even if something happens, the GPS system is compromised? Is that a promising line, and are you concerned about those kinds of capabilities?
I think it's as absolutely fundamental line. I think we're negligent if we don't consider that, and so we're focused on that in a great deal. So when we, in the design, if you look at the mission statement that we highlight there, there's really not a whole lot new about it. It's taken right from Title 10, so it's solid ground to stand on. The only thing that I would I dared to add to that is to just highlight that this mission now has to be executed in multiple domains at once, because it all comes at you at one time. And so from the seafloor up to space, from the deep water into littoral and in this information domain, we've got to be ready to prevail in every one of those at once. And so you just look at some of the vulnerabilities that arise in every one of those domains, information domain you highlighted, space, and other places. If we're not looking to mitigate the vulnerabilities there, then I should be held accountable for that.
And a good thing is that, given the abilities of our sailors, if we can provide them capabilities in that regard, I would count on our forces being able to operate and innovate in that kind of a context,
Right.
As well as anybody's, or better than anybody's in the world.
Right, I would agree with you. It's sort of our asymmetric advantage is our creativity and ingenuity and our ability to act independently. We need to make sure that we continue to foster that. And so one thing that I'm always evaluating is, has that connectivity led to a dependence that may have gone past the point of being healthy, so that I want to, it goes back to this distributed command that we talked about. Are they ready to act independently? So we need to make sure that's part of our development programs.
All right, sir. This gentleman right here.
Sir, excellent presentation. George Nicholson from the Global Special Operations Forces Foundation. Issue involving Navy SEALs. Congressman Ryan Zenke from Montana, former Navy SEAL, who's on the House Armed Services Committee, has expressed his serious concerns about the decision of shutting down the two units, which are HSC units that have been supporting support to the SEALs. Are you looking at how what they provided in the past is going to be able to, how they're going to be supported? And the other question is, the original requirement for the V-22 for the Navy was 48 aircraft. It was to support COD support, it was to support CSAR, and support the SEALs. Now you made the decision to acquire 42 for the Navy. I've asked the question about, are they also going to have a mission of supporting the SEALs and CSAR? And I've been told, nope, that's not in our charter.
Mm-hmm. Well, with respect to the helicopter squadrons that you talk about, the budget we just dropped does retain some of that capability. So I think we've been working very closely with the Special Forces community to make sure that we've continued that support. With respect to the Osprey, I mean, the world's wide open for that aircraft, right? It is so versatile. We're buying a bunch of them, mostly to replace our C-2s right now is kind of where we're focused. But again, with something that versatile, I don't think that we'd want to preclude any kind of a role for it.
Yes, ma'am, on the side over there.
Thank you. Leandra Bernstein, Sputnik International News. In the latest Pentagon budget request, there was, I believe, $3.4 billion for the NATO European reassurance initiative, and I'm wondering what that means for you. It's about a fourfold increase over the previous year. So I'm wondering what it means in terms of Navy presence,
Yeah.
whether rotational or permanent, specifically in the Aegean, Black, and Mediterranean.
Right. You know, one of the stops I made when I first came to the job was this Regional Sea Power Symposium held in Italy, and it was for sort of Eastern Mediterranean and Black Sea nations. So I got a chance to talk with all of my chiefs of Navy, counterparts there. And the one thing that dominated that was the concern with this resurgent Russia, particularly in the Eastern Med, and you've seen it throughout, right? The Black Sea, even the Caspian Sea, in terms of the Russian Navy becoming much more active. Their role in Syria was a brand new thing at the time, and so we have been increasing our presence there. We've got 4 destroyers now forward stationed in Rota, and so we've been doing that. You know, the other area which has been sort of a consistent demand signal is activity in the undersea. And so I would say that, I'm in constant conversations with Admiral Fogo and Admiral Ferguson out there in terms of what sort of, thing they need. And so, we will play a role in that. It'll be responding to sort of the demands that the theater imposes, and I'll be in, very close to touch with our Navy commanders out there.
What those demands, do you have any sense of what those demands are now?
Well, I hesitate to. We talked about some of the threats that are coming on, but I hesitate to kind of commit to specifics in terms of what we'll forward deploy.
Let me go to somebody over here. Yes, sir.
Sure, Admiral Byron Callan, Capital Alpha Partners. We seem to go through these generational debates about ship size. Jefferson's gunboats, Admiral Zumwalt's sea control ships. The Senate wants to have a look at the size of our carriers. And I just wonder if, there are arguments for larger platforms in terms of their endurance and survivability. Is there anything you see over the next 4 or 5 years that would kind of fundamentally change that debate? It may go back to some of the earlier questions on littoral combat ship and fleet architecture, or do you think there's just an enduring argument for these large platforms that are simply going to be more survivable, endure longer?
Right. I think that, this is just, speculation going forward, but I think that's the lethality and effectiveness of some of our systems going forward, both kinetic, sort of traditional weapons, missiles with payloads, warheads, and then also sort of the non-kinetic or electromagnetic types of, or directed energy types of payloads, that will cause us to think hard about the value and the shape of, the value of size in and of itself, and the shape of future warships. So, as we think about sort of the next Navy, it goes back to Sydney's question, I guess, is if we're not building that type of thing into the DNA of the ship, then I think we're missing an opportunity to open those questions up and take a look. We may, at the end of that, find that there is just sort of an intrinsic greatness to size. You can carry more stuff, right? It's just displacement. How that relates to size, survivability, or increased vulnerability in this new world, I think we have to really take on very hard. So it seems to me that a trend is that you can get more and more capability, just miniaturization, right, into a smaller package. What that means from a warship standpoint is, I think, all has to be on the table, right? So certainly some things can be delivered in a smaller package, but some things just can't. And so how do we combine all that together? Mass is becoming more and more a vulnerability than it is an advantage. And so we're going to be operating more distributed, dispersed. And so how each and every warship fits into that, that's the really creative work, I think, that we need to do. But if we don't think ahead, if we think behind and we kind of take out the last plan and say, how can we upgrade this, I think we're going to fall behind our potential there.
And the natural tendency is to go for a mix, but you have to guard against, or tell me if you think, sort of compromising as a way of avoiding making decisions. In other words, we're not certain what direction we want to go in, so we'll try and go in both directions. I mean, is that a concern you think about?
Well, yeah, so you get to this sort of gray middle that really doesn't achieve anything very well. But on the other hand, not everything that the Navy does is high-end warfighting.
Sure.
So in terms of assuring our allies, deterring, responding to crises, the Navy is, I think it's in its fullest manifestation, does more for the nation than warfighting. Certainly, we must be able to fight and win our nation's wars at sea. That is, the go, no-go criteria, and we'll never take our eye off of that. But there are other things as well, and they have a legitimate role in maritime security.
Let's see if we can get one or two more in. All right, yes, ma'am.
Admiral, Navy aviation, can you tell us a little bit more about that strike fighter shortfall that has you concerned? And what do you want on the deck in terms of unmanned aviation?
Right. No, that's a great question. So, some of the today's concerns about strike fighter inventory are fairly well defined, I think. So we have aircraft that just need to get through their depot maintenance period and get back out onto the runways as ready aircraft so that we can put them back in the inventory and get our pilots flying them. Particularly for the Legacy Hornets, we ran into some unanticipated problems getting through those. We're addressing that by increasing the number of workers in the depot. We're getting some help from the private sector where it's necessary, and so that's just a matter of depot throughput. As we're sort of seeing the shortfall on the Legacy Hornets, well, we're flying our Super Hornets fast, more, and so you can see flight hours building up on those. And we're learning we're taking all the lessons we learned from the Legacy Hornet challenge and looking forward and making sure that we incorporate all of that going forward. And then there's the new platforms, the Joint Strike Fighter, the 5th generation aircraft, the continuing role of the new Super Hornets, and then, as you said, so unmanned technologies. I'm eager to get started in unmanned technologies, and so I want to get something on the deck of an aircraft carrier unmanned as quickly as we can with a legitimate role to play. Because there is so much we've got to learn there, so many unexplored questions. And so, we've kind of revamped our strategy there with U-class now C-bars. I'm not sure I'm too much in love with that C-bars name. So, I keep back, we'll come up with something better than that. But, so we're looking at something that we can get there. It has a legitimate role in terms of tanking, and I would say that ISR is on the table for sure. And we'll free up tactical aircraft by virtue of taking on that mission. But even more important, we'll learn how to integrate unmanned aircraft into our air wing. And what does that mean, flying on and off a carrier? Well, there's just so much to learn now that I want to get after that. In the meantime, the decisions that we make now, we'll do our very best not to preclude increasing the platform's capability in other areas as technologies come available, as we learn those lessons, and we kind of grow into that. So, but I think there's just so much to learn right now. I'm eager to get started.
And I'd love to keep going, but we have reached our closure point. So thanks to the audience for your attendance and your great questions. I think we had a lot of great questions.
That was terrific. Thank you.
And thank you, CNO, for being
Senator,
here.
thanks so much. Thank you very much. Thanks.